This is Rabbi Dr. Sid Weinberg, and I welcome you once again to our podcast. Our numbers are going up. We have more people liking us on Facebook. If you have friends who might be interested in some of the topics, please direct them to this Facebook. Today's episode is sponsored by KC Home Care. If you need home care services for a loved one or for yourself, please let me know on private email and I will put you in touch with my friend Casey. Today we're going to talk about the beginning of the book of Exodus. Now, the first thing that we need to understand is that the majority of the Torah takes place during the life of Moses. Now, it's interesting because the book of Genesis covers tens of thousands of years from the creation until the end of the life of Joseph. And so a lot happens during that period. It is truncated, it's shortened. And so we don't necessarily get a lot of detail. We certainly don't get a lot of halakha. There are only a few halachot in the book of Genesis. From the book of Exodus through Deuteronomy, we find that it takes place over the lifetime of Moses. It begins with Moses's birth, and it ends with Moses's death. Therefore, the span of those 4 books of the Torah is 120 years. That is a very short time compared to the span of the book of Genesis. So Genesis really exists to lead us to the lifetime of Moses, particularly Yetziat Mitzrayim, to the Exodus from Egypt, and the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Those are the highlights, and they are told in great detail. And so the 613 commandments, most of them will appear in these 4 books of the Torah. But let's begin with Joseph in Egypt. Yes, we have to go back a little bit. Joseph saves Egypt and is able to provide a decent place for the Israelites to settle. Now, at the beginning of the book of Exodus, we learn that a new Pharaoh arises over Egypt who knew not Joseph. Now, that would be very hard because Joseph was a cultural hero in Egypt. He saved the Egyptians from famine. He built up Egypt and he brought the Israelites in. So how is it possible that we have a Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph? What we actually have, in all probability, is the beginning of a new dynasty. Now, there was a group of desert people similar to the Israelites who took over Egypt. Their name was the Hyksos. Now, the Hyksos probably were the dynasty ruling over Egypt when Joseph was brought to his grand honor of being the vizier, sort of the vice pharaoh of Egypt. When a native Egyptian dynasty took over from the Hyksos, fought them, beat them, and returned to power, anyone that was related to or in league with the Hyksos would be considered an enemy. So it is not surprising that this new Pharaoh may have known about Joseph, but was against Joseph and against his people. And so he enslaves them because he is afraid that there are so many Israelites now that they could, if they wanted to, cause a rebellion against this new dynasty. And so he enslaves the people, puts taskmasters over them, and makes their life into misery. In the midst of all of this, we have the birth of Moses. Now, Moses was born to Levitical parents. It is said that his father was actually the son of Levi, but in terms of timing, that doesn't really work out unless Levi lived to an extremely old age and is not realistic. It's not really likely. But he was a Levi. And interestingly enough, we often see that heroes are the eldest in their family. Now, the eldest in the family does become a hero, but she is not the lawgiver. Moses is the youngest in his family, right, E?
Yep.
He has an elder sister who is the oldest in the family, and her name is Miriam. And a brother, Aaron, who is a little bit younger than Miriam. Now, Pharaoh is quite afraid that the Israelite males, who would be the ones that would lead any rebellion against him, are getting too many. There are too many of them. And so he makes the most evil decree possible: the death of all male children. And so Moses is born during this time of murdering all of the male children, according to Pharaoh. It is interesting to note that the Midrash says the reason why Moses's mother was given the honor of bearing Moses was because she and Miriam refused to kill the male children at birth. They used different names, Shifra and Pua. They were called before Pharaoh because the children that they brought into the world were not dead. The male children were not dead. And so it is said that they were in actuality his mother, whose name was
Yocheved.
Yocheved, and his sister Miriam. And so the Midrash tells us that is why Yocheved was honored to be the mother of Moses. But Moses now is the youngest child. He is born after Aaron. Now, Aaron was born before the decree, so he was allowed to live. Moses is born during the decree, and his mother tries to hide him for a little while, but it's not going to work. And so, having faith in God, Yocheved builds a basket made of straw and covered with pitch. Pitch is like tar, so that it will float and it won't sink. And she puts this boat with the baby in it on the Nile River. But like a good mother, is she going to just let the thing go down the river without knowing what happens to it? She is not. And so who does she send, E, to watch the boat on its journey?
Miriam.
She sends Miriam. Thank you, E. You're doing a great job. She sends Miriam. Now, it just so happened that that day, the princess of Egypt was bathing, swimming in the Nile River. And lo and behold, comes this basket with a baby. And she opens it up, and Hashem opens her heart. God opens her heart, and she falls in love with the baby. After all, who doesn't love a cute little baby, right?
Yep.
Even E has a soft heart for a baby. Everybody does. And the princess is not married and has no children of her own. And so she adopts Moses. Now, does she know that Moses is a Hebrew? Yes. Will Moses know that he is a Hebrew? Not right away. Unlike the movie, The Ten Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille, there was never a possibility that Moses would become Pharaoh of Egypt. A better movie to watch is the cartoon movie Prince of Egypt, which really gets the story right. While the Pharaoh and Moses were raised as brothers, there was no question that Ramses, or whichever Pharaoh it was in line for the throne, and Moses was not. He was not the son of a Pharaoh. He was a member of the Pharaoh's family. He was a prince, but he was not in line for the throne. So let's go back. So Miriam sees the princess fall in love with the baby, and they pull the baby out of the Nile River. There is, however, one problem. The princess cannot feed baby Moses because she had not been pregnant and therefore was not able to make breast milk. In those days, that's what babies had to eat. There was no formula, there was nothing like that. And so Miriam, who is a very brave and heroic girl, goes up to Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, and says, this is not a quote, nice baby you got there. And the princess says, yes, who are you? Oh, my name is Miriam. And looks like you got a little problem. And the princess says, yes, I can't feed the baby. So Miriam says, I know a woman who just gave birth. And so she could breastfeed this baby for you, if you would like. Oh, that's a wonderful idea, the princess kind of says. And so the baby gets taken back to Yocheved. his own mother. And not only is Yocheved protected from the evil decree that Moses must die, because Moses is now a member of the royal family, but the princess pays Yocheved to breastfeed her own son, Moses. And so it's an interesting passage that's not often talked about, but Moses is raised in large part by his own mother until he is weaned. Now, when he is weaned, when he no longer requires breast milk, in those days was between the ages of 3 and 5. And so Moses lived with his own mother, possibly up until the age of 5. Therefore, it is highly likely that he already had a sense of his own heritage and knew somehow through his parents that he was indeed a Hebrew and not an Egyptian. But he does go to the palace eventually and becomes the adopted daughter of the princess and the brother of the man who will be his nemesis when they reach adulthood. This is the beginning of the story of Moses. We will talk more about Moses, about his trip through the desert, how he meets his beloved wife Zipporah, and more about his beginnings as the greatest of all prophets and the lawgiver of the Jewish people. Thank you for listening today. It's always a pleasure to do these podcasts for those of you who listen, and I do appreciate your time. Thanks.